Signal Sciences is the industry's first web protection platform that works in any cloud, any container, any platform as a service, and any modern application architecture. The Signal Sciences web protection platform can be deployed in next-generation WAF, RASP, or reverse proxy modes, giving customers ultimate flexibility and coverage. Protect your web applications with Signal Sciences web protection platform. Signal Sciences, protecting applications, connecting teams. For more information, check them out at signalsciences.com/PSW. Today's determined attackers easily bypass even the most advanced network defenses. Trying to ramp up staff to detect their backdoors can cost thousands of dollars and take months, even years. With Active Countermeasures AI Hunter, we enable junior analysts to detect even the most advanced backdoors in a matter of hours. Sign up for a demo and purchase our product today by visiting activecountermeasures.com/ASW. Active Countermeasures. Make every analyst a hunter.
Welcome back, everyone, to Application Security Weekly. This is the news for the week of July 1st. I am, of course, your host, Keith Hoodlet, still joined by James Wickett of Signal Sciences. So, James, I first wanted to talk a little bit about your recent DevOps Days talk that you gave in, it was Austin DevOps Days, yeah?
Yeah, well, it was actually at the Austin OWASP, but it was a DevOps report, or a DevSecOps report that just came out this, I guess, like the end of the spring, early summer.
So you mean a DevOps report, right?
Yeah, but that's right. I know you don't like the DevSecOps, but it is published as the DevSecOps report, and it really focused on kind of understanding that crossover between security and DevOps. And so it was a really interesting report. We Signal Sciences, we kind of co-sponsored it along with Sonatype and several other companies that are in that space. But we had over 2,000 people fill it out. And sort of juxtapose both people that were, what people were doing last year in their DevOps journeys and their security implementation of that versus what they're doing this year. And it also juxtaposed nicely like mature DevOps shops versus kind of immature DevOps shops, and like where they were as far as instrumenting security across the pipeline. How breaches affected adoption of technology. All sorts of stuff. So it's full of like little nuggets in there that I think is really helpful for folks.
What are some of like the big takeaways that you got from the survey? Because I know that your slide deck that we'll put in the show notes here had a lot of those, but I'd be curious for our listeners, obviously, that are probably listening to this, on their travels throughout the week. What are some of like the key takeaways that you got from those surveys and from the data that you collected?
Keith, I think this is something that you'll really like, and I think it really plays to where we really see the security industry going forward. The survey was mostly filled out by more developers and self-selected people that are doing kind of DevOps type stuff as well. But among the people that were surveyed, specifically among the developer tribes or groups, 48% of them said they really want to do security. They just don't have enough time to allocate to it. Also, across the entire survey participants, I think 91% or it's 92% said security is everyone's job. You have to, I don't know, I can't remember the actual percent, but so there's a delta there between what people know they should be doing versus like what they actually allocate time for. And this kind of fits with what Thomas was saying as well. Like, developers are stuck, and security really has to help kind of, instead of making that gap bigger, try to help free the developers up so they can be a little bit unstuck from that and kind of put security in more places across the pipeline. I thought that was interesting. And the other interesting piece was the amount of how organizations, we hear about breaches happening, and we see them in the news all the time. But the number of respondents that said breaches help drive their DevOps adoption and their security posture inside of their DevOps adoption was really high. And I think it was 1 out of 3 organizations said they have seen a web application breach in the last 12 months, which, hey, Signal Sciences, we're in the web application security business, so that's not completely surprising to me. But it was interesting to see the DevOps folks that are really kind of wrestling with this and the impact of breaches to kind of their new allocation to security and putting cycles towards it, sprints towards it, and where in the pipeline where they're going to put money behind this. So I thought it was a really interesting report from a lot of those different angles. So
That's awesome. And speaking of breaches, it looked like we had a couple of items pop up in the news. I don't know if there were any of the bugs, breaches, and more articles that you wanted to go to first. I know that we mentioned Gentoo out at the top of the show. Did you want to dive into that? Do you want me to dive into it a little bit?
Yeah, no, let's dive into it. You want to, so kind of, can you want to set the stage for it?
Yeah. So effectively what happened is this is story number 2 under the bugs, breaches, and more on the wiki. Back on the, let's see here, what is the timeline? So I actually have this in the article. So back on June 28th, right around 8 o'clock at night, the Gentoo GitHub organization was found to have been breached. And so what ended up happening was they ended up pushing a few malicious packages into that organization that obviously is open source and publicly available. And they actually have a whole rundown on kind of like what happened. James, I don't know if you want to dive in deeper. Obviously, that's kind of a high level, but what are some of the takeaways that maybe you noticed from this breach that you wanted to call out as, being specifically problematic?
Well, I mean, Gentoo is trusted by a lot of people. I think that's a problem. Also, like when we think about this, like we sort of inherently trust kind of folks that are upstream in our distribution. So if we want to like take down packages and things like that, and this is just another example of where that's not, that's one of those things you can't just trust inherently.
Yeah, for me, one of the things that in the timeline that they broke down on the attack itself is at 8:29 local time to their logs. So they give it as 2019. I don't know if that's Eastern time or what have you, right? But it says that the attacker was trying bad passwords against an account, and then it successfully managed to gain administrative access on one of those accounts. What that immediately clued me in on is that they must not be using two-factor authentication to actually get into the account, because it's in the same minute time block that they're both trying bad passwords and then they get a successful infiltration of one of the admin accounts. It took them it looks like 6 minutes to add a dummy account to the organization. My guess is the reason that they added a dummy account is they wanted to see what kind of logging and reaction the organization would have to the dummy account being added. Especially because then a dummy account is then added with administrative access thereafter. So to me, that all seemed like they were just kind of first, hacker voice, I'm in. And then secondly, seeing, okay, from there, what can we do? What can we get away with? And it amazingly took all of 10 minutes from the time that the initial breach occurred to the first person noticing that something was going on the GitHub organization itself, because they did an auto push via a mirror bot for the initial GitHub Gentoo repo at about 2025. And so 4 minutes from initial push, you get first person noticing something's up. And then at 2030, a second malicious user is added. And at 2034, another malicious commit is put forward. So from immediate time of breach, 2019 to 2049, 30 minutes is the first abuse report to GitHub support, which to me seems pretty awesome. I don't know if it was, a third party that did the abuse report, if it was the organization themselves that was locked out. But in that process, you immediately see the value of open source as a canary in the coal mine, right? Like, admittedly, you should have two-factor authentication on, and you wouldn't probably see this problem to begin with, but you start to get some immediate feedback from the user base and some reactions thereafter. I don't know if there were other things further on the timeline you wanted to call out, but that was one of the things that came to mind right away. Was you could deduce pretty quickly they weren't using two-factor authentication, because it was effectively just a password reuse problem from the looks of it.
Yeah, and it's another vector of like account takeover type attacks, right? And I think that we continue to see more of that. I also thought, like you've mentioned, like it is a short amount of time for them to actually kind of take notice of it and become aware of it. So and that's kind of like best case scenario of how fast you can detect something, really.
Yeah. I mean, talk about rolling incident response, right? Like you look at further down on the timeline itself, there's a formal ticket by 9:05 into the GitHub organization. In fact, let's see here. The second abuse report was 8:53, And then it immediately follows thereafter with the 9/28. So about an hour later from initial breach, GitHub organization actually freezes the Gentoo org on GitHub and starts to do lockouts and roll incident response. So granted, it's a large repo. It's used by probably millions, I would say. Maybe not. Hopefully not. I mean, Gentoo's a pretty obscure Linux distro for Linux distros as far as they go. For those that are purists, by all means, I'm a fan of Arch Linux as well. I like pure builds, but at the same time, it's an hour on what was, let's see, that was the 28th, so that would have been like a Thursday night. Pretty good response time overall, and then eventually they force pushed some updates to get rid of the malicious commits, but I'm sure that there's still news to come on what those malicious commits actually did. I'm sure somebody's going in and kind of pulling them apart at this point. I don't know if there was anything more you wanted to add to that story before we jump to the next one.
Yeah, no, that was the thing I was hoping to know, like, that's the thing I'm interested in knowing, like, what was the push, at those pushes they mentioned there. And I tried to go back and see if I could dig in and take a look at it, and I couldn't figure it out.
Yeah, they still have the hashes for the commits up on the initial kind of PostMortem report. So I think that those are still technically part of the history for the commits that took place. And so you imagine you could probably go down and then, or pull it down and then go ahead and like change the head and look at what actually was put in there. But I'd be interested to see as well if anyone ends up ever doing any sort of threat analysis of this, or even starts to do like pointing figures at who it was. It wouldn't be surprising if it was a state-run organization to some degree, but at the same time, I could easily see this being somebody just added in some crypto mining software into Gentoo and called it a day, right? Because that seems to be the latest attack vector that we see.
That's right.
Speaking of breaches of a different kind, I wanted to jump to story number 4 under the bugs, breaches, and more, which is the Ticketmaster breach that happened as well. So this was actually a little bit different, where it was a third-party library that ended up being the vector of breach for Ticketmaster. I don't know if you've read any about this. It wasn't one of like the bigger stories of the week, but I thought it was still interesting as a highlight to risk that companies face. Did you get a chance to look at this at all, James?
Yeah, and this is one of those things where we are kind of inheriting code or even like relying on other suppliers. In this case, this is a paid for type thing, and we don't control all the code that we think that we control in our application. We don't, like, our application consists of much more than the stuff we actually wrote, right?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And so it looks like they had a really fast response time on this. This happened back on June 23rd where this took place. And so it was good to see that they did a postmortem. They went into it a little bit. Of course, they're offering the 12 months identity monitoring service. That seems to be the de facto result of any sort of breach incident. So for everyone else that has yet another version of monitoring, congratulations. You will now get more spam email to your inbox. So I know that we were both interested in story number 3 under the "If you build it, they will come" story, which is the new study shows that you can predict credit ratings from your online tech fingerprint. What were your takeaways from that article, James?
Okay, this one really shocked me. I thought this was really fun. In the article, they're taking some assessments on your online activity, and Keith kind of fill us in here on this, but your as you're doing things on the internet, whether how you shop, types of email addresses you use, any of your patterns that you do, and it's actually more predictable, or it is a better prediction of your credit worthiness. And they kind of go through like default rates of people with their FICO scores versus their kind of the scores that they were able to generate. And they had some really good takes here. So it turns out people that use Android and have Yahoo accounts are like the worst people to loan money to. So if your friends have a Yahoo account and use Android, never loan them money. Or if you do, just never expect to get it back, because their default rate was way higher than it should have been towards the if they had a higher FICO score.
I thought that was especially interesting, but it also talks a little bit to the economics of the situation, right? So this is actually, I should say, this is an article by someone that I admire in the industry, Daniel Miessler, who put this together. It actually is kind of a highlight of another article that he was reading and links back to from the show notes as well. And yeah, to your point as well, one of the interesting things is the few things that jumped out from the report itself was iOS versus Android were some of the comparisons. So if you're using an iPhone of some kind, I imagine version of iPhone eventually matters. I don't know that they went that deep, but still, I think that that's important, right? Like if you're not refreshing your phone every couple or few years, they probably say, don't know if they have enough money to do that, so therefore, not sure if I should loan them money. It probably negatively affects your score. But also, they looked for emails with a name, like the name in the email. People with numbers in their email defaulted more. As you pointed out,
which is good, domains. Right? I mean, I've always been suspicious of all my friends that have numbers in their email addresses.
Yeah, or you just feel really bad for those pure folks, or those poor folks, I should say, that just registered something late because somebody else went and is squatting on that email handle or what have you. So it'll be interesting for the next generation how this ends up having ramifications, right? Because eventually all names will be taken. To some degree, so that'll be interesting. The other thing as well, though, is people who ordered at night instead of in the afternoon for things that they were shopping for online was also people that defaulted more, which I thought was interesting.
Though that gets really into the Big Brother aspect of it, right? I mean, it's like even when I make a purchase, right, it stops being even characteristics about me, but my patterns and. I mean, how do you feel this is going to affect privacy long term, and whenever stuff like this continues to develop?
Yeah, I mean, this is metadata that you can't really walk away from, right? Like your account is definitively logging in at a specific time and ordering something. The email that you're registered with is a habit of your behavior that you can't readily change per se. As well as, of course, interestingly, desktops defaulted far less than mobile. Which might be indicative of the age of the user, right? Certain age groups tend to use desktop more than mobile, but also individuals who do a lot of development and coding tend to use desktops more than mobile per se. Or if they use mobile, they don't use it as much for certain things. So yeah, these are the sort of metadata privacy related things that have almost nothing to do with what you purchased, but simply your behavior as an individual. Which is concerning. But at the same time, as Daniel Miessler points out, this is exactly what you use AI for, right? It's to make predictions based on sets of data that you can then leverage into business and other means of predictive analytics of some kind, right? So the fact that banks and finance agencies are looking at data that is perhaps not personal in terms of your name or your address. So they're not judging you based on where you live. They're judging you based on when you purchase something or what kind of device you're using. And I think it was Space Rogue that quoted on Twitter a few years ago. Basically, there are those that can afford iPhones, and there's everybody else. And I think that the iOS versus Android problem is very real. People that buy Androids tend not to either be able to afford the ecosystem that Apple has put together, which is, you must buy certain apps and you kind of get locked in. Therefore, it's tough to use a lot of the things that you're buying unless you have a MacBook Pro or an Apple, computer of some kind. And those are expensive. All of those things are expensive. And so it's interesting how they've kind of zeroed in on both behavior and device type as indicators of defaults. So I don't know, man. I don't think it bodes well considering there are something like several billion Android devices out there. That doesn't necessarily point to very strong economic indicators for the long term for a lot of people.
Well, also it kind of gets you thinking about whenever you want to flip the other side, and if you want to, as people try to scam, work the system, right? It will be to impersonate those characteristics that are found desirable, right? And maybe we'll see some of that uptick kind of in the spoofing and other types of attacks against where they're trying to take advantage of banking systems.
Well, I mean, there's already user agent spoofers that you can use as plugins to your browser, right? It would not be surprising at all if a person that owned an Android device set up their browser to use a user agent that said they were on a MacBook or using a mobile device that was running iOS, right? At the end of the day, that's a spoofable data point that is not necessarily easy to validate from log files that they would be using to train this AI. So at the end of the day, you could definitely play with this to your advantage. The other side of this, and I think that there was some articles about this either covered on Paul Security Weekly or maybe even another podcast years ago, but the idea that if you were to set your user agent to something different and go and do things like buy airline tickets, you'll find that the prices are different based on the kind of user agent that you present. So if you're presenting a MacBook or a Mac OS or iOS, they tended to be higher than if you went to go buy plane tickets that were, Windows or Android or what have you. So it'll be interesting to see how that also affects individualized pricing for different things, which is, both terrible and something that software can do. So. Yeah. What I wanted to jump to next, unless did you have any additional thoughts on that, James, before we jump to the next article?
No, I think we kind of talked through it a bit, but it is one of those things that when we change the algorithm for how we determine either credit worthiness or price of stuff, there will be both sides of that it's sort of a bad scenario on all ends. So.
Well, I think that there are definitely states that are trying to cut this off at the pass. As we highlighted at the top of the show, there's story number 2 under If You Build It, They Will Come, is the California legislation that just recently passed. So it is affectionately referred to by myself as GDPR-Lite. So that is California Consumer Privacy Act of 2018, Title 1.81.5. Effectively, what they've done here is they've come in and they've said, look, as a consumer, you have the right to request that if a business is collecting your information, they give you specific disclosure of that information, as well as the sources of where they're collecting it from, what commercial purpose it was collected for, who it was sold to, and then basically any other personal information that was collected in specific, not even as a generality of, we are collecting it from like buttons, but it's like we collected it from like buttons on the following pages. So this is definitely stabbing right at the heart of both Google and Facebook. I don't know. What did you think of this legislation?
Yeah, I didn't read the whole link. It's pretty big.
It's lengthy. It's legislation.
Yeah. But when you look at you kind of saw something like this coming, right? You look at how GDPR was going across, and California is usually kind of the first on the adoption curve for this kind of stuff in the States. So I expect we'll see more around this because everybody is concerned about their privacy. Everybody is concerned as far as just and I'm not talking like us or like tech people, like even like grandparents, mom and dad, folks like that, are just that they're like, well, how do I know that people have my information, right? So legislation is coming to our industry big time.
The big one that I took away from this was section 1798.115 subsection D, which states, and I'll quote it, a third party shall not sell personal information about a consumer that has been sold to that third party by a business unless that consumer has received explicit notice and is provided an opportunity to exercise the right to opt out. So effectively, the way that I read that, and again, I am not a lawyer, and I think I can speak for James here when I can say James is not a lawyer. Totally sure. So in this case, it's a situation where if a third party has received this information somehow, they can't sell it unless they tell you. Now, I can just see the legislation or the litigation, I should say, that's going to come out of this, right? Because I guarantee you that people aren't going to tell you that, every individual as part of that data set that, hey, we're selling your information, right? So as soon as a breach happens or something like the Cambridge Analytica breach, for example, right? Collected as part of a third-party subset of data as part of Facebook, right? Suddenly, if a Cambridge Analytica breach comes out, man, the lawsuits that are going to come out of this, specifically to that section, are going to be outrageous. And, to a lot of ways, to people's benefit, it makes me wonder, though, James, I don't know if we haven't talked about this beforehand, but where do companies like Google and Facebook go to from here, right? Like if they are effectively in a straitjacket with this legislation coming out. I don't know what they could do differently at this point to change their business model.
I think everybody finds a way to keep working, and so and wording in law and stuff like that, like it often reads one way to us, even with GDPR, right? It's and for most people, like the experience of GDPR is like I gotta click I accept the cookies before I do everything. I think even the commit strip articles, right, was great. It's like I want to read this thing. Okay, I accept the cookie. I allow you to do this. I allow you to do this. I finally want to do this. Turn off my ad blocker. I can finally view the article. Right. There's a good one on that. Maybe we can link that in the show notes. But I think that's the. I think we're getting serious about privacy. I think that Google and Facebook, of course, they will still try to find a way to continue on, doing some of the things they're doing now. May have to be modified some, but we'll see. I don't know. I don't know the right answer here, but I do know that they're vested in continuing on.
To quote Jeff Goldblum from Jurassic Park, life. It finds a way.
In this case, business, right? Business finds a way.
Yeah, right. Exactly. The people will find a way to do business. Although, if you go to story number 3 under the food for thought section with the 7 creepy patents as issued by Facebook. Now, this article does highlight that in some cases, Facebook is issuing these patents defensively as to prevent competition from using them. But the things that it talks about were, well, creepy. So they have the first patent on here is basically reading your relationships, which is a patent to discuss predicting whether you're in a romantic relationship using information such as how many times you visit another person's page, the number of people in your profile picture, and the percentage of your friends of a different gender. I thought that, these are all, I don't know, were there any others in here, James, that you wanted to pick out specifically as just strange and somewhat invasive patents? Because they have a lot, and these 7 that they cover were weird.
Well, there's the predicting your future one, which is the patent application describes using your posts and messages in addition to your credit card transactions and location to predict a major life event like birth, death, graduation, and when it's likely to occur. But some insurance companies and some underwriters would love to know some of those pieces, right?
Yeah, no, absolutely. That is one of those things that, the actuaries are going to be all over that one. That's for sure. So maybe that's Facebook's new model is rather than selling your data, they can simply say we're selling the predictive analytics based on the data we collected, which is not technically your data, right? So who knows? That could be the next.
Maybe you have a calling to be a lawyer. It sounds like you're ready.
At one point, it's funny because I was studying years, like 9 or 10 years ago. I honestly considered it, and I'm glad that I didn't because we wouldn't be here today for one, and 2, I'd probably hate myself. So there's that. Not to say that I don't love lawyers. I've got several in my family who I love dearly, but I can't say that I would love life as a lawyer myself. So the other one that I thought was kind of creepy, though, was the listening to your environment. Now, I'm guessing that this one is already in use today because I don't know how many times I've had a discussion, right? I've not looked it up on my phone. I've not looked it up on my computer. I've not looked it up on my wife's computer in the household. But I've had discussions about things that suddenly start showing up in my ads all over the place. And it's the creepiest thing in the world. Have you experienced anything like that?
I have, yeah. I was having a discussion with some friends, and then they pull out their phone and they go to Google, and the first suggested thing was something that we had just been talking about, and I'm trying to remember what it was we were talking about, but stuff like that happens, and that is pretty freaky, right?
Well, and the patent itself reads specifically that it's a patent application where it explores the use of your phone microphone to identify the television shows you're watching, the ads that were muted, and using electrical interference patterns created by your television power cable to guess which show is playing. Which is so they're using probably stuff like this currently to actually collect your conversations and then give you targeted ads based on that. I personally look forward to things like macOS Mojave, which lets you shut off which apps can actually leverage your microphone selectively as the OS. So you can guarantee that Google Chrome is not going to be listening to my conversations. That's for sure. So there's that. But I did want to cover actually just a few quick learning and tools that I did throw into the show notes. I know that I didn't prep you for these, James, but the few that I saw that were really good.
Yeah, can I ask you one question? Yeah, could I ask you, what does it mean to experience fulfillment?
Great question.
I wanted to ask you about that one.
So it is story number 2 under food for thought. So this was actually a thought experiment that I did last week, where I asked the question, generally speaking, what does it mean to experience fulfillment? So I asked that out on Twitter, and a number of really good feedback items came through. One is the concept, which is a Japanese concept called ikigai, which is a reason for being, also sometimes referred to as raison d'être, which is my best French that I can possibly give. But it was just kind of a thought experiment. Feel free to go ahead and click that link under the show notes. Follow along with some of the suggestions as people pose them back. For me, I feel that for me personally, fulfillment is kind of that pursuit of horizons that are related to creation, right? Developing new things, whether it's new relationships or art or code, or even new creative ways to do things in bug bounty hunting. That was what it meant for me. Did you actually participate at all, James? I didn't happen to catch if you responded to that particular series of tweets.
I didn't, but as I was reading through it, I thought it was a really great idea, and I thought it would be good to call you out on the show, because I think when we know in our career, in our lives, the things that really bring us joy or happiness, or where we feel like we have purpose, like those are really important to stay in tune to. I think, like, as technologists, I've noticed through both operations and security, you can kind of really lead to burnout, and you can really kind of get stuck in ruts. So if you find yourself in that space, I think really try to listen to what the situation and your feelings and stuff like that, which are not always talked about in our industry, but they're really helpful to help us understand, like, what helps us, what is life-giving and good for us, and what are the things maybe we should stop doing that kind of is maybe hurting us. So I applaud you for doing that, and for kind of helping us, like, talk about that and think about it through the industry. So thanks.
Thank you. Yeah, you're very welcome. And I imagine I will probably be doing more of those. In fact, I might do one tonight. Who knows? I will certainly be tweeting about it and kind of collecting feedback. I imagine at some point I'll start a blog series on it, because I wrote like 6 or 7 pages on just like a flow of thoughts through the process of, what is fulfillment, and how do we define fulfillment, and what does that mean for us today as technologists, right? So the idea of the horizon used to be that sense of exploration, and now that horizon's available to you at the touch of your fingertips, right? Like, you can go and see different parts of the world if you wanted to, right through your phone. So that was kind of an interesting thought experiment. At some point, I will be sharing the full set of thoughts as I go through those. So actually, a couple of learning and tools that I did want to cover. Thank you for mentioning that, James. I do appreciate that very much. The first learning and tool, though, was refactoring in VS Code. As listeners know, I am a huge VS Code nerd. I love it quite a lot, and so it covers some of the useful tips and tricks on refactoring. There's also React from zero. So those that follow me on Twitter know that I kind of loathe the idea of learning React.js. I don't know, James, if you had any experience learning React.js as well, but I found this and I thought I would share it with our listeners. Yeah,
it looks like a good tutorial, kind of going through that. So looks fun.
Yeah, there was. I was looking at it. I enjoyed the first module. I'll probably continue on. Another one, of course, is a link to a tweet from our good friend, or at least someone that I admire, Sammy Kamkar, which is how to sniff network traffic from your iOS device without a jailbreak, which is plugging it into your Mac and then going ahead and running a specific command as well. So I thought that was both cool and very Sammy Kamkar-esque. The last one, though, and we'll leave it with this one, but going on the idea of machine learning and predictive analytics and kind of all the things that we've been talking about today, is deep exploit, which is going to be highlighted at Black Hat Arsenal this year. It's a open source GitHub repository called machine_learning_security deep exploit, and it talks about using Metasploit and machine learning to effectively train your system to attack for you. Did you get a chance to look at this at all, James?
I read it and I thought I really need to get back into like doing some more Metasploit stuff, because I really haven't played with Metasploit for several years now. But like I thought it was very clever. Yeah.
Yeah, well, clever and scary, right? Because now it's suddenly, not only is it doing the exploits, but it also prints out to like your screen as well when you've got a shell. It's like bingo. It's like it's telling you when it gets shells for you. Which, man, if penetration testers don't step up their game, they're pretty soon going to be replaced by deep exploit machines. So who knows? Maybe we'll see that at the next DEF CON. Instead of doing the Cyber Grand Challenge, they'll just do the pen testing challenge, and it'll just be a bunch of robots up on stage. Who knows? But with that, I just want to thank everyone for joining us this week for another episode of Application Security Weekly. Remember to git, commit, and stay classy.